They said I was neglecting my daughter, but all I did was lose my apartment. Tanya, Brooklyn, NY. Tanya had a job, a daughter, a tiny studio apartment. She was making it work. Then her landlord raised the rent. She couldn't afford it. They got evicted. With nowhere to go, she stayed in a friend's living room, her daughter sleeping beside her on the couch. A neighbor called Child Protective Services. Within 72 hours, her daughter was gone. Not because of drugs, not because of violence, not because of abuse, because she was homeless. Tanya's story isn't rare. In fact, it's common. Across America, parents are losing custody of their children not because they are dangerous, but because they are poor. They didn't hit their kids. They didn't abandon them. They just missed rent, left them alone while working a shift, couldn't afford childcare, struggled with utilities, had no health insurance. In the eyes of the system, that's not hardship, that's neglect. And neglect means removal. Once the system takes your child, getting them back becomes a financial obstacle course. You're told, get stable housing, attend parenting classes, pay for drug screenings, show proof of employment, maintain weekly supervised visits. Each of those requires time, money, and stability. Things the system already knows you don't have. And every day your child is gone, you fall further behind. Meanwhile, the child is placed in foster care. And if you don't complete your reunification plan in time, your rights are terminated forever. And the child? They might be adopted. They might bounce from home to home. They might age out. But the parent, they don't just lose custody. They lose their child to the state. This isn't about abuse. It's about a system that punishes families for being poor, then makes money off the punishment. This is the foster system loop. Be poor, lose your kid. Be charged to prove you're worthy. Fail to comply, lose your child forever. It's not justice, it's a cycle, and it's happening every day. Tanya Matthews never thought she'd end up in court. She didn't have a criminal record. She wasn't addicted to drugs. She worked, she cooked, she read bedtime stories. She loved her daughter more than anything. But in the summer of 2019, that didn't matter. Tanya worked at a local grocery store in Brooklyn. Minimum wage, no benefits. She took every extra shift she could get. Her daughter, Mariah, was 5. Bright, playful, obsessed with dinosaurs. They lived in a small studio, cramped but cozy. Then the rent went up. $300 extra a month. Tanya couldn't pay. They were evicted. With no savings and no family nearby, Tanya did what thousands of mothers do. She relied on her community. A friend let her crash on a couch. She picked up more hours. She enrolled in the city's emergency housing program. Mariah still went to pre-K every morning, holding her hand, but they were technically homeless. And that's when CPS got involved. It started with a knock on the door. A polite investigator, a clipboard, some routine questions. Tanya explained everything. She had a job. She was saving for a deposit. Her daughter was healthy, fed, But to the state, that wasn't enough. Because neglect under New York law doesn't require abuse. It only requires failure to provide basic needs. No stable housing? Check. No private bedroom? Check. No clear timeline for resolution? Check. 3 days later, Tanya was told that Mariah would be placed in temporary care. Just for now, just while things get sorted. She screamed, she begged. They said it wasn't personal, it was policy. Tanya went to court the next week. The judge listed the steps she'd need to complete to get her daughter back. Secure stable housing, show proof of income, attend weekly parenting classes, submit to regular drug testing, pay child support for Mariah's foster placement, attend supervised visitation every Tuesday at 2 p.m. Tanya worked Tuesday afternoons. Her boss said she couldn't take off every week, so she missed visits. When she finally found an apartment, 6 months later, the rent ate up nearly all her paycheck. She had to cut back her work hours just to attend court dates and classes. She fell behind on utilities. The agency said she was not demonstrating stability. The clock kept ticking. After 12 months, the caseworker filed for termination of parental rights. Tanya was devastated. Mariah had been in 3 foster homes by then. At the final hearing, the judge said, "You have not shown the court that you can provide a stable environment." Tanya replied, "I lost everything trying to prove I could." She hasn't seen her daughter since. Tanya's story is one of thousands. Real, quiet, invisible. Not a headline, not a scandal. Just a mother, punished for poverty in the name of child protection. To understand how Tanya lost her daughter, we need to understand how the system defines child neglect. Spoiler, it's not about harm, it's about resources. What is neglect? In most U.S. states, neglect is defined as the failure of a parent or caregiver to provide food, clothing, shelter, medical care, or supervision to the degree that the child's health, safety, and well-being are threatened with harm. Sounds reasonable, until you look closer, because it doesn't distinguish between can't provide, won't provide, or doesn't have access to provide. A mother who chooses not to feed her child, neglect. A mother who skips meals to feed her child but can't afford rent, also neglect. In practice, poverty is not considered separately. It is often treated as the crime itself. How the CPS process works. 1. A report is made usually by a teacher, doctor, or neighbor. Many are mandatory reporters by law. 2. An investigation begins. CPS visits the home, interviews the child, inspects conditions. 3. Risk factors are evaluated. These include income, housing, employment, past involvement, and even parental disability. 4. Findings are filed. If CPS believes the child is in danger, they recommend removal. 5. Family court takes over. A judge sets reunification goals, often strict, often expensive, and all of this can happen before any abuse or crime occurs. Because CPS operates on risk, not proof. It's a system designed to be cautious, but that caution lands hardest on the poor. Reunification is not free. Once a child is removed, parents are given a plan to get them back. This usually includes parenting classes, sometimes out of pocket, drug tests, even without any history of substance use, psychological evaluations, proof of housing and employment, supervised visitation, requiring transport, time off, childcare. Often paying child support to the state for the foster placement. Each step assumes the parent has time, money, flexibility, and support. But if they had those, they probably wouldn't have lost custody to begin with. Poor families targeted disproportionately. Research shows over 70% of child welfare cases involve allegations of neglect, not abuse. The vast majority are correlated with poverty-related issues. Black and indigenous children are disproportionately investigated and removed. Children of parents with disabilities, especially mental health, are far more likely to be taken. In other words, neglect isn't evenly enforced. It's filtered through race, class, and ableism. The loop begins. Once in foster care, children are harder to retrieve the longer they're gone. Why? Caseworkers change, judges rotate. Foster parents bond with the child. States receive funding incentives for permanent placements and adoptions. If a parent misses a hearing, loses housing again, or fails a drug test, the clock resets. And after 12 to 15 months, the state can file for termination of parental rights. That means no more reunification, no more updates, no more contact, forever. But here's the twist. Studies repeatedly show children placed in foster care, especially long-term, face higher risks of homelessness, incarceration, PTSD, substance use, teen pregnancy, suicide. In many cases, staying with their struggling biological parent would have led to better outcomes. But the system doesn't measure love. It measures compliance. And for poor parents like Tanya, compliance is expensive. This is how the foster care system becomes a trap. It conflates poverty with danger. It enforces standards without support. And it punishes the most vulnerable families for struggling to survive. It doesn't fix the problem. It just relabels it from poor family to broken home, from need support to need removal. The foster system says it protects children. But if you look closely, you'll see a pattern, not of child abuse, but of who gets investigated, who gets judged, who gets punished, and it's not random. Who's most likely to lose their kids? Poor parents. Parents living below the poverty line are over 10 times more likely to be investigated for neglect. But here's the truth. In many cases, the only difference between a neglectful home and a struggling home is a working credit card. Single mothers, especially single black mothers. Why? Because they're more likely to live in poverty, more likely to use public benefits and be scrutinized, more likely to work multiple jobs and leave kids unsupervised, more likely to face eviction. And because of bias. Caseworkers are human. They carry assumptions, and many still believe a two-parent household is inherently safer, even if it's unstable. Black families. Black children make up 14% of the U.S. child population, but they make up 22% of children in foster care. That's not coincidence. That's systemic racism. Research shows black families are more likely to be reported for the same behavior as white families, less likely to be offered in-home services, more likely to be separated from their children, less likely to be reunified even when controlling for income. Disabled parents, especially those with mental health diagnoses, intellectual disabilities, autism, physical disabilities requiring assistance. Courts and agencies often assume these parents cannot safely care for children, even without evidence. They're required to prove competency at a higher standard than any other group. Sometimes they lose custody before the baby even comes home from the hospital. Immigrant families, language barriers, lack of documentation, fear of deportation, cultural misunderstandings, all of these make immigrant parents more vulnerable to losing custody, even when they've done nothing wrong. Add it all together. Who gets caught in the crosshairs of CPS? A single black mother working 2 jobs. A Latina immigrant mom who doesn't speak English well. A disabled dad living on SSI. A native grandmother raising her grandkids without legal custody. None of these people are abusers. None are predators. They're just undersupported. But to the system, they're flagged, monitored, judged, removed. The language of the system, words like at risk, failure to thrive, non-compliance, unfit, lack of protective capacity. These aren't facts. They're interpretations, made by people with bias, working in agencies under pressure, often underpaid, overworked, and taught to see danger where there is struggle. The impact on children. When kids are removed from parents who loved them just because those parents were poor or disabled or marginalized, the damage is deep. Attachment trauma, identity confusion, behavioral problems, academic struggles, long-term trust issues. We say we're protecting them, but too often we're just shuffling them between trauma sources. From poverty to bureaucracy. This is who gets hurt the most. Not the children of the rich, not the middle class, but the ones whose families needed help and got punishment instead. For decades, the foster system operated quietly, behind closed doors. Family court records sealed, little media coverage, few people watching, but that's changing. Because across America, parents are fighting back, so are lawyers, activists, even some judges. And they're calling the system what it is. A poverty punishment machine disguised as child protection. Class action lawsuits. In recent years, multiple states have been sued for wrongfully removing children without imminent danger, discriminating against disabled parents, failing to provide adequate support services before removal, over-policing Black and Indigenous families. In New York, a 2021 lawsuit accused the city's Administration for Children's Services, ACS, of treating poverty as neglect and forcibly separating thousands of families without legal justification. The case included parents like Tanya, mothers who lost custody not due to violence but eviction or unemployment, legislative reform. Some states are waking up. Colorado, for example, passed a bill in 2023 that prohibits removing children based solely on housing instability. California is reviewing its neglect statute to separate poverty from risk, requiring concrete harm before removal. Other states are providing free legal counsel to all parents in dependency cases, limiting the use of drug testing without probable cause, expanding access to in-home services instead of removal, ending timelines that automatically terminate parental rights after 12 months, shifting the narrative. Advocates are also challenging language, because calling a mom neglectful just because she's poor, that's propaganda. Organizations like RISE, Movement for Family Power, and Upend Movement are pushing for renaming CPS as Family Regulation System, ending state funding incentives for adoptions, elevating the voices of parents and children who've been harmed. They argue, we don't need more removals, we need more rent assistance, we need childcare, we need community, not courts. Parent-led resistance. In cities like Philadelphia, Detroit, and Chicago, parents who've been through the system are leading resistance efforts. They run support groups for reunification, know your rights trainings, legal clinics, court accompaniment program. They show up in court. They tell their stories in public forums. They demand dignity. One group's motto is, "We are not broken. We were abandoned by policy." Community alternatives that work. Some local efforts have proven more effective than removal. Home-based services, social workers visiting weekly to help parents with housing, food access, child development. Peer parenting mentorship, pairing struggling parents with those who've recovered custody. Direct cash aid, giving families emergency grants to avoid eviction or utility shutoff. Prevention, first models, where caseworkers provide support, not surveillance. Studies show these methods. Reduce child removal, improve long-term family outcomes, cost less than foster placement, preserve community trust. This resistance isn't fringe anymore. It's growing, and it's working. Because people are realizing the child welfare system isn't broken. It's working exactly as it was built, to surveil and control the poor. But families, they're reclaiming power. One courtroom, one protest, one policy at a time. If Tanya had money, she wouldn't have lost her daughter. She wouldn't have been evicted, wouldn't have needed public shelter, wouldn't have drawn the attention of child protective services. She didn't fail as a mother, she just ran out of money. But in America, that's enough to call you unfit. How did we get here? America's child welfare system wasn't built for support. It was built for surveillance and control. Its origins go back to the 1800s, when orphan trains took poor immigrant children from their families and shipped them westward to be raised by white Protestant families. The assumption, if you're poor, your children deserve better. And that logic never left. Poverty becomes risk. Instead of asking, what help do you need? How can we strengthen your family? We ask, are your kids safe with you? Can you prove you're stable? We treat poverty like a disease that must be contained, but what we're really doing is blaming parents for their circumstances. You lost your job? Why didn't you save more? You're on food stamps. Why did you have a kid? You're living in a shelter? Maybe you shouldn't have custody. This isn't about child safety. It's about respectability politics. The media's role. TV shows, crime dramas, and news stories often portray poor parents as dangerous, neglectful, addicted, criminal. Rarely do we see depictions of parents who are broke but loving, homeless but protective, struggling but present. We are conditioned to see poverty as pathology, so when CPS steps in, we assume it's always for the child's benefit, even if there's no abuse. The double standard. Middle-class parents can leave their kids with an iPad while they work remotely, miss a pediatrician appointment, struggle with depression. No one calls CPS, but if you're poor, you're labeled unavailable, unstable, unfit. Because the system doesn't just punish poverty, it pathologizes it, the bureaucracy of blame. Every professional involved in Tanya's case, the CPS investigator, the family court judge, the social worker, the parenting class instructor, the supervised visit monitor. They all thought they were doing their jobs, but the system they worked in doesn't ask, is this parent dangerous? It asks, can this parent meet the state's standard of success? And that standard, it's designed for people with money, time, and support, not the ones who need help. Best interest of the child. It's the phrase that justifies everything. But whose version of best are we using? Is it a bedroom of their own, access to violin lessons, organic snacks, or is it a mother who knows their tears, a father who works 2 jobs to keep the lights on, grandparents who don't speak English but give everything they have? The system claims to act in the best interest of children. But when it tears them away from parents who love them, whose interests are really being served? Poverty isn't neglect, but we've built a system that treats it like it is, because it's easier to remove a child than to repair a society that keeps their parents down. Tanya never stopped loving her daughter, even when the court said she was unfit, even when the visits stopped, even when the letters went unanswered. She wakes up every day hoping Mariah remembers her laugh, her warmth, her voice. She lost her child, not to abuse, not to neglect, but to a system that mistook poverty for danger. And Tanya's not alone. Right now, this very moment. Somewhere in America, a parent is losing their child not because they're a threat, but because they're poor. They'll be handed a stack of court orders, a list of demands, a deadline, and no roadmap. They'll scramble for housing, skip meals to pay for parenting classes, beg for time off work, miss a visit, miss another, and the clock keeps ticking. Because in this system, time isn't a grace, it's a weapon. We say children belong with families, but we build structures that separate them. We claim to protect kids, but we criminalize their parents for being broke. We say the system is broken, but what if it's working exactly as intended? So, what can we do? Here's where real change begins. 1. Change the definition of neglect. States must stop treating poverty as a risk factor. No child should be taken simply because a parent is poor. 2. Provide early support, not punishment. Emergency housing, food assistance, childcare, legal aid, before families collapse. 3. Fund families, not foster agencies. Billions go into the foster system. Redirect that to keeping families together. 4. Ensure legal rights for parents. Every parent deserves free, competent legal representation in family court. 5. Listen to those who've lived it. Parents like Tanya, kids who aged out, foster youth who never went home. They know what needs to change. We cannot fix this with silence. We fix it with policy, pressure, and people who refuse to look away. So the next time someone tells you a child was rescued, ask, from what? From who? And could we have helped that family before tearing it apart? Because poverty is not a crime. Love shouldn't have to be proven, and every family deserves a chance before they're judged beyond repair. This is not just Tanya's story. It's not just one case. It's a pattern. It's a failure. It's a system. And now you know.